Okay, so we are going to begin our panel on leveraging federal support for making, and Kumar Garg is a senior advisor to the Deputy Director at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, focusing on education and broader innovation policy, and he will be moderating our panel this afternoon. More importantly, Kumar is a tremendous connector and advocate for the maker movement, in particular making and education, and so much of what we've been able to do with Maker Ed, it really comes from the incredible support from the White House that we've felt. So we're so thrilled to have Kumar Garg and the rest of the panelists here today. So I'm gonna let Kumar go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. We've got a great panel on the role of the federal government can play to support making. First, I just want to give like a huge amount of thanks for all the folks who helped put yesterday's first ever DC Mini Maker Fair together, as well as today's great set of discussions. You know, these things take an incredible amount of work to put together. You know, I was on some of those email threads, and and the huge amount of response I got yesterday. I was sitting at home with my two daughters, we're under one, about how much people were having fun. So huge appreciation for everyone here. And I don't know if folks know this, but we actually are within the drumbeat towards the first ever White House Maker Fair on June 18th. And so it's incredibly exciting, and the DC Mini Maker Fair is part of this drumbeat that we want to build to have more young people and adults have access to making no matter where they are in the United States or abroad. I think the purpose of this panel is, this is something that the president has sort of focused in on since the early days, which is how do we make sure that we're empowering more kids and adults to pursue their passions in ways that can have an impact on their local communities, can help them become entrepreneurs, can deepen their learning, can allow spaces to become places where folks can cooperate, and can lead to local economic development wherever we find it. And so the Maker movement has been something that we've been sort of involved in and tracking throughout the administration. But we started to push and say, what's a way that we can use the bully pulpit of the administration to really get more done here? And so the idea behind the White House Maker Fair is obviously to have some really compelling makers there to celebrate, but then also to be a real frame for the federal agencies and for our private sector partners to really talk about new specific steps they can take to support makers wherever they are, and to have more folks be able to have access to this. So one of the things I think the goals of this panel is to really sort of help share with so many folks in the room who already may know some of these agencies, but to really engage in an open dialogue about the way the federal government, with all its different ways that agencies cooperate with their constituencies and with local communities, can support making, and to really have this be a brainstorm, and we can sort of bring in the audience and one of the sort of powerful things I always find in these conversations is folks have just really good ideas. So just feel free to also just engage this in an open pitch session. Hey, X plus Y should do Z. And it can be the agencies that are on the stage here, but then also other ones. And a lot of times we're able to then follow up and say, hey, we heard a really good idea. So don't be shy. So we've got a great panel here that represents 3 great agencies that already have done a lot in this space and are poised to do more. I'm just gonna have each one sort of introduce themselves, say a couple words about why they're excited about this area, and just sort of opening comments, and then I've got questions and ideas to throw to them, and then we'll sort of pull in the whole audience. So let me first start to my right with Susan. Susan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So hi everybody, and folks around the corner there, I hope everybody can hear me. My name is, hello, use the mic. My name is Susan Hildreth, and I'm the director of the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And yes, we are a federal agency, very small but mighty, and we provide grant funds to all the libraries and museums in the United States that aren't federally funded. So I know we have folks from all around here, so one of our major programs is to provide funding at a population-based level to each of the states, and you each have a state library agency in your state that gets that federal money, and they follow some general guidelines and general priorities that we set, but we also have discretionary funds for libraries and museums. So when I think about, so we're here to help you as best as we can. When I think about making, we have done a couple things in the past that have really gotten us interested in this very important arena. My agency has focused on 21st century skills and how important those are for our communities and how they can be readily achieved and evidenced in libraries and museums for a number of years. So our interest in that, we have a great publication on that on our website, has really spurred us to move into this area. We also are just completing a great partnership with the MacArthur Foundation, where we co-funded 24 digital media labs around the country based on the U-Media model in the Chicago Public Library. These digital media labs are super. We have information on our website about them. And it's interesting that the target audience there really was young people, and in many cases, young people who really had not connected with any kind of formal educational situation very successfully, and we're really helping them develop skills and competencies to go on in the world and be effective. But in several, maybe 6 or 7 of our learning labs, we have also created maker spaces, and a lot of folks that go there are really interested in making and creating, and this is an offshoot of that. So I don't want to talk too long. I know we have other panelists and questions. IMLS has supported a number of different grants for making, and hopefully I can talk a little bit about them as we go on.
Great. All right, next up we have the Corporation for National Community Service with John.
Thanks so much, Kumar. It's great to be here. We are the Corporation for National Community Service. My name is John Kelly. I serve as a Deputy Chief of Staff there at the agency. And how many people know what CNCS is? Hands? Okay. How many people know either AmeriCorps or Senior Corps, or any of our grantees, Teach for America Citizen Schools, or Habitat for Humanity? So we are the small agency as well, small and mighty, that find ourselves often teaming up with good partners like Susan, that really provides the infrastructure for mission-driven human capital, either through dedicated service, where folks usually receive a small stipend and some education award to spend a year doing service, or in generating volunteers and supporting episodic volunteering. And so we support about 5 million Americans getting involved in their communities every year. We're in about 65,000 locations. We have 6 different issue areas that we support in our grant making that really range far and wide. But over 50% of our funding goes to education-related initiatives, and we have a long history in supporting education. And moving into STEM education and the maker movement has really been somewhat of a new phenomenon for us. It's been going on in our field for some time with our grantees, but not in a real big priority way from our agency. And so we've been moving into that space quite a bit for the last couple of years. Last year at the White House Science Fair, the president announced a new initiative creating STEM AmeriCorps, which is kind of our umbrella for all kinds of different STEM education initiatives. And within that, we support making activities in a number of different ways. And hopefully I'll get a chance to go into those a little bit more, but one of those is with Maker Education. That was one of the first, and then First Robotics. We placed AmeriCorps Vista members to bring their robotics competitions to low-income communities. And so we have a lot going on in kind of the human capital space, and that's kind of how we come to this conversation.
Great. Next up we have George from the Engineering Directorate at the National Science Foundation.
Hi, I'm George Hazelrigg, National Science Foundation, in the Engineering Directorate. NSF is not one of the small agencies. It's one of the bigger ones with an annual budget of around $7.5 billion a year. NSF is chartered really to fund fundamental research and education, but unlike Department of Education, we don't really give funding directly for educational programs. Rather, our goal is to understand the educational process. So we'll fund research in education, primarily. And in engineering, of course, in the Engineering Directorate, we fund all kinds of things related to engineering technologies. But in addition, we also fund activities that relate to engineering education. So one of the concerns that we have, if I go back to when I went to school, which was the middle of the last millennium, actually, I and my friends always played with things when we were young, and I always lament that if kids today did the things we did, they'd wind up in jail. They'd never get to college. But it was a different time. You could get away with things like that. And we would make things, and we would play with cars. As I was saying before, I've rebuilt several car engines, made motor vehicles run from the ground up and stuff like that. And that was before I went to engineering school. Now, today's kids, cars have become so complicated, you just basically can't do anything with them anymore. And the ability to make roadworthy vehicles now is almost beyond the ability of high school kids and even older kids. So one of the things that we see the maker movement can do is reintroduce hands-on playing with hardware in advance of going to college. And that has a huge impact on how students learn engineering. At least that's been my experience. So we're at the beginning of looking into the maker movement and seeing what should our role be in this vis-a-vis getting kids interested in STEM areas, getting them prepared better to go into schools, into science and technology education. And at the same time looking at how do these opportunities influence the way kids learn, understanding the learning process better, and then getting to the point where we can introduce these kinds of things effectively into education at all levels.
That's great. So one topic that I figured we could cover with this group is there's a huge interest when you sort of talk to folks who want to do more in making around maker spaces, which is the idea of dedicated spaces where students and adults have access to a set of equipment, some mentors, some projects where they can do passion-driven projects that could spin off and create companies, but then could also just become sort of, the things that connect you into engineering before you become an engineer, but just sort of get you excited. And I feel like the panel actually touches that in lots of interesting ways, because you've got museums and libraries, which are spaces themselves that think a lot about space, but there's a question about what are some really effective ways to think about spaces within those. There's a human capital piece, which is a space without mentors and wouldn't really get the same value. But then there's also a question about what are the sets of projects. So if it's not redesigning a car engine, although there are a bunch of new outfits that are actually doing open source car development, what are those things that we sort of call the 21st century chemistry set, where we haven't, you can still blow stuff up and get you really engaged. So who wants to sort of take a crack at this sort of what often comes down as space, mentors, and projects, and the way that you guys are thinking about it?
Well, I can talk about space, because I think that's one of the reasons why I'm really interested in this opportunity. And by profession, I'm a librarian. So I'm in a world where constantly people are asking me, well, what do we need a library for? And why, we have the internet, and what's the purpose? Well, there's a great purpose of that institution as a community hub. But I do think in the world of digital publishing, the allocation of space in a library is becoming less and less dedicated to books, and we have some opportunity to reconfigure and renovate the space we have. And we really are all about learning. Libraries and museums are learning spaces. That is our key role. We are important, we are need to have, not nice to have, although everybody categorizes us as, oh, that's nice maybe, but if times are tough, we'll cut them. So how can we take advantage of the built infrastructure in this country of libraries and museums, protect them, and make sure that they're meeting our community needs? And I think making is a great way to do it, and having a maker space. Now, sometimes people are concerned in museums that there's sometimes a barrier of a charge, but often the museums that are dedicated to making, many of them are children's museums and science centers, they're creating ways, if they have some kind of an entry fee, to make it available to kids that are coming for free. So that's not a big problem. And libraries are some of the most trusted institutions in the country that create great opportunities for families to come together. And the makerspace focus on kids learning is terrific, but I also think it's a great opportunity for the family to engage in learning. And I just have to say one other quick message for NSF. We're really excited for NSF to do some really good research in how we can measure the impact, because we think this is a good thing to do, but we have to really show it's making a difference. So I hope NSF will help us with that.
That's great. Who wants to jump in?
Okay, I'll take it. Well, yes, NSF is jumping into that, as I think you know already. And we have a Directorate for Education and Human Resources, which in fact has activities to look at the impact of makerspaces already. And I look back at myself in the way I got into engineering, is that I'm not a spectator. I don't like watching sports. I like doing sports. And never liked being on the outside. I wanted to be on the inside of everything, and wanted to be. Instead of watching people build stuff, I wanted to be the person building stuff. And we've been funding a lot of things lately that I think are contributing to this. And in fact, it's not something that emerges quickly. We go back about 20 years. We started funding additive manufacturing or 3D printing. And of course, I think several of you here have done some 3D printing and see that this enables even very young people to design stuff and make it. You know, it's one thing to design stuff, but I always say that designs never fail on paper. They only fail when you try to make them. And it's real interesting to experience failure in designs. If you don't do that, you really don't learn much. And 3D printing really allows people at all ages to get into that. So I think that the things that we're funding really do offer opportunities for people in many age brackets, all the way down to not far beyond kindergarten, is it? And Kay would say, I think over there, that first and second grade students can get into making these days. So the new technologies that are coming out of the research offer a lot of opportunities, I think, to kids to get active in making stuff.
And I think so. If you have the beginning point of an innovative space and people thinking about how they can utilize that space, and then you have the research to show what activities and what are the right things to be doing in them if you're looking for desired outcomes around education and inspiring kids. Then at some point you need to plug in the people, and at the root of any movement are the people. And it was fantastic to be out. Actually, Susan invited me out last week to a summit that they were hosting with some of the most innovative libraries around the country, and it was, I think, really educational for me and some of the folks I was interacting with, just to hear how much crossover and intersection we really had and how we were approaching this work. We come at it with not going on the cheap, or not thinking about how you're going to manage volunteers or inspire volunteers. You're just setting yourself up, I think, for failure if you only think about the space itself and the tools you need and the printers and those pieces. If you don't have the community involved, if you don't have a plan to bring those folks in and train them and get them inspired themselves, then I think you're going to get in a situation where the space may not be as energetic and life-giving as you would like. We're doing probably the most of our work in supporting makerspaces is through our AmeriCorps Vista program, and that's the program that's more capacity building. They're the ones who can think about what are the different needs and what are the assets of the community that they can bring in, whether it's reaching out to different tech companies or reaching out to some of the folks who may be retired and have incredible skills, or students who are studying and want to in college and want to utilize their work to work with younger kids. And so they can also do some small-scale fundraising. They can pull together tools and all kinds of different set up the programs behind kind of behind the scenes. Where we have a state infrastructure, and I think that's probably our biggest resource, is a state infrastructure that can meet a movement on the ground. And we are really actively trying to push that state infrastructure to think about the maker movement and think about how they can be a resource to provide some of these capacity building VISTA members to different projects around the country.
That's great. So this is my second question, and then I think we'll sort of open up to the group. So for us, it's always immensely useful to have people sort of come out of the woodwork and say, here's how I can help. So I wanted to sort of give that to this group. And here's the question, which is, which companies, nonprofits, people, ideas, and partners are you seeking in your work? So who do you want coming out of the woodworks to partner with your agency, sort of deepen your work in this area? Because some of them might be in this room or more broadly. And then what either investment opportunities or others, you don't have to be super specific, but what do you sort of see as opportunities coming in the next 12 to 24 months that might be worth putting on the radar screen for the school?
Okay, good question. In terms of partnering, I think similar to John, libraries and museums have a huge network all around the country. So, in particular, libraries have been greatly funded by the Gates Foundation in the 21st century, by Andrew Carnegie in the 20th century, and we're looking for the next Bill Gates or Andrew Carnegie. But that might not be that easy to find. So if we have some corporate partners, if we have nonprofit partners, we're really interested in that. But I think particularly in terms of how we work on the ground, often the institutions we work with have their own supporters at a community foundation level or at the local level that can help support the work of that institution. So although I mentioned briefly in the beginning a great opportunity we had with the MacArthur Foundation to fund a national competitive opportunity, I think sometimes it's more likely for institutions that you may be affiliated with to find support in your own community to help you participate in some of these exciting activities. And a couple of things that I might mention is that we have made an investment. We have a great partnership with the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, as well as the San Francisco Exploratorium, North Carolina State University Library, and the Chicago Public Library. And these are some of the earliest and strongest adopters of making that we know in our fields. They're going to help us identify best practices in making in libraries and museums and create a community of practice for anyone who's interested in that to belong to. So I'd be happy to share information with you about that, give you my card. We're just getting that off the ground, but that's a big investment we've just made, and we'll be announcing it officially on the 18th. The other thing that we're looking to do is we have STEM activities kind of writ large with a focus on underrepresented youth as a priority in our competitive grants. And I have some information here about our grants that I'd be happy to share with anybody who's interested. So although we haven't explicitly said we're going to just fund makerspaces, that's a really good opportunity, particularly under the STEM priority. So we're really willing to try to work with you and support what you're doing in your community. And by at least identifying all the best practices, we also hope that we'll find either a nonprofit or a for-profit partner who could set up a funding source so we could have a competition for creation of makerspaces in libraries and museums. We'd love to do that. Right now we're doing the best we can with the funds we have, and we want to support the great work we know that's going on the ground. So also just another shout out to the Mozilla Foundation, who has maker parties that they offer organizations get involved with during the summertime to learn more about making and help train their volunteers. So Mozilla is a huge supporter of making, and although it's not on the agenda today, sometime we'll talk more about badging, because that has a lot to do with maker spaces too. So check out Mozilla and badging too.
Sounds great. John.
Well, I feel like our existing partnerships, our strength of our partnerships are really with nonprofit organizations right now. We have kind of 4-H, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the Girl Scouts, Maker Education, First Robotics. We have a lot of partnerships with schools as well. That's probably where our strength, where our area of growth that we're looking for right now are probably two areas. One is more and more higher education institutions. Right now, I think there's about 150 that we have direct partnerships with, out of over 4,000 or some that we really feel like we could do much more in that space. And then the private sector. We have a long history. As a federal agency, we're called a corporation, and it's a public-private partnership. It's a little confusing structure, but we have really broad authorities to partner with the private sector that we're really looking to explore more and more. We're on a fixed income from Congress right now. We have faced elimination. It's one of those nice things as well, but sometimes in tough budget times, nice things people don't always want to invest in. And so that the House has voted to eliminate us the past couple of years. We have really broad bipartisan support in the Senate. So right now we're pretty much at the status quo. But we're still looking to grow, and we want to take the existing pilots and programs that we have at some of those nonprofits I mentioned in the beginning, and form partnerships with the private sector that both bring resources as well as volunteers from those private sector partners to get involved in projects and really grow the work that we've invested in.
Great. George?
Okay, National Science Foundation has really two groups of people that we interact with very much. One is small business and the other is universities. In the small business community, we have a small business innovation research program, and through that program we fund activities that relate to maker spaces, making, and all of that, and in fact technologies for education as well. In the academic community, of course, we partner with universities across the country. And the one thing that we do is we fund fundamental research and education in these universities. The universities themselves, however, have a very strong interest in attracting students into STEM fields. And we support that in a variety of ways at NSF, both directly through research grants, and many of the research grants have outreach to K through 12 in a variety of activities, and museums as well. In addition, let's see, the academic community has a very strong desire to attract students into the STEM fields, and so they're supportive of this as well, and we're leveraging their desires to attract students in terms of the maker spaces. I think Kumar Garg has reached out to universities in the last few days, and I think about over 100 of them actually signed up to participate in activities that we're going to be sponsoring over the next year or two.
That's great. So why don't we open it up for audience questions? I'm sure there's a bunch, so my strategy will be to take a bunch, and then we'll sort of get thoughts from the panel. Who all wants to either make a comment or a question, and we'll sort of go around and let a bunch sort of come in.
Andrew Coy from the Digital Harbor Foundation up in Baltimore, Maryland. My question references a conversation we had earlier about formal support for informal learning. In other words, the internet was built by people who never went to school to learn how to build the internet. That's really a lot of the research and funding. But as we're talking about the maker movement and how much is happening outside of the school day and it's starting to happen during the school day as well, I'm looking for thoughts on ways to transition some of the funding from grant-based application to more sustainable streams. Especially as somebody who has stood up a makerspace in Baltimore, my full-time job essentially now is in finding the funding to keep that going, and my staff does all of the fun work. But I'm thinking, a principal for a school doesn't have to apply every year for the dollars to make the school run. They get to focus on actually solving problems of what the kids need to be learning. So are there thoughts of ways to transition from from some of the grant and what I would call non-sustainable, but initial startup funding to sustainable?
It's a great question. Why don't we collect a few more, and then, yes, in the back. Oh, sorry.
I'm gonna take this one and I'm gonna go.
Yes.
I'm gonna go.
Sorry.
Sort of as a follow-up to that, and per our conversation earlier about formal support for informal learning, I see a big conflict there with the kind of informal learning that's...
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Katie Sherry. I'm at the University of Maryland studying physics education and engineering education. I see a conflict there with the kinds of informal learning, what might be considered by academia as informal learning as of now, informal contexts. And I actually was curious for the panel, some of your biographies had some skepticism, let's say, of formal learning contexts. I'm looking at you, Mr. Hazelrigg. So I'm just wondering, how is it that you are negotiating that very tenuous relationship between informal learning that has not been sort of justified by the facilities that you work for, and the sorts of real capital R learning, let's put it there. How do you negotiate that line?
No, those are great threads. Any other we want to collect? We have one here, and then why don't we keep?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go across.
Hi, my name is Darrell Hurt from the National Institutes of Health, and my question was about metrics. So you brought this up earlier, that a lot of these things are totally innovative. No one's ever seen this before. No one's ever done this before. What metrics do we have to, and we kind of addressed this earlier about, tiered granting mechanisms. You start small and then you grow larger, but even then, developing these metrics of, this is valuable, and we turn around. So, you mentioned at NSF, what kind of things are you looking for to say whether a program is successful or not? And how can we make sure that we're meeting those?
Two back there. No hand from Dale, which is. You don't want to get me sick.
Hi, thank you. My name is Hillary Easton. I'm a consultant with the World Bank, and my question also touches a little bit on something we discussed earlier. Mr. Kelly, I believe you were the one who said that community engagement is really vital for a makerspace to succeed. And I'm wondering, particularly for low-income communities where even more basic resources may not be available or may not be properly supported, what mechanisms have you used to collect community feedback and really co-create these spaces? How do you develop community engagement, and how do you find out from the people who are there what they actually need and what they actually want?
Is there another question over
One
on
more
this?
back there. I thought I saw it.
No, it's good.
Oh, okay, great.
Other questions over here?
Awesome. All right. Well, do we have somebody?
Yeah, we're gonna get to Ken.
And then we'll.
Ken Shield with Cuboplex. I just, for a local library, I'm thinking going back home, and our local kind of small startup children's museum, what should I tell them about how to access whatever you have to offer? I'm not sure whether they're aware of you already or whatever, but just what should I tell them?
Great. Well, this is more than enough for us to work with, and we'll do another round of these. So I'll give a quick run through some of these, and then we sort of throw to the panel because I think there's some questions, and I think we've got lots of knowledge here. So I think the informal piece is really important. I think both, some of the foundations that Susan mentioned are investing heavily in this idea that learning is a 24/7 activity. It's passion-driven and it's deeply engaged. So the boundaries of the four corners of the school don't necessarily capture all of the learning. And I think lots of educators think that too. I think the question for us is always, so on a formal level, the federal government supports informal STEM learning through a set of activities. Through the Department of Education has a 21st Century Learning Program, which supports informal, and then there's a number of other agencies. But I think everybody sort of gets that the sustainability question ends up being a huge one. I think both for inside and outside. The design question I think that folks are trying to figure out is how to build these spaces in a way that they start to create lots of value, and then sort of tap into federal, state, and local resources to make them sustainable, so that folks are not constantly in a sort of funding cycle where they're just able to access foundation resources or local community resources. And one of the things that we're sort of engaging in conversations with our federal partners is really for them to also be briefing their enthusiasm to their state level leads, because a lot of sustainable funding actually happens through a mix of federal policy and state level decision making. And so I think that's a really rich conversation. And then on metrics, I think this is a huge part. I mean, you know, I sort of work on STEM policy in general, and one of the big things that we sort of have is that we have to both marry this idea that inspiration, connection, and deep connection to sort of lifelong learning is something that all educators and policymakers sort of buy into. How do you sort of distinguish activities that are really exciting but don't have that long-term impact versus ones that do? I think the field has actually come a long way, actually. So you have lots of working models as to what types of interventions make folks into lifelong learners and sort of activate interest. It's actually interesting. There was one of them was actually done on this idea of aha experiences. It was called like Eyeballs in the Fridge, where they interviewed a whole bunch of practicing scientists and engineers about early experiences that were turned on. And a lot of them were these sort of informal experiences where they said, oh, I got to like, you know, build this thing with my sibling, or I got to do this thing in a classroom. And then I kept noodling on it. And one of the reasons why they titled the paper Eyeballs in a Fridge was one said, you know, my older sibling did some experiment and then put eyeballs in the fridge of the experiment they did. And like that messed with my mind so much that I just had to like figure out more, and like it launched a whole career of interest in that area. So these small experiences end up mattering a lot, but I think there's a huge question. I think there were some specific questions that I think folks can sort of delve into, both on sustainability spaces and then also like how do we sort of co-create on the ground. And then there's, I think, a mega question as to how can folks on the ground learn more about everything you guys are doing. So who wants to sort of start?
Let me start with that. You know, in terms of the sustainability, I mean, that's a very, very valid question. But I think when I think about that, I think about it more from the world that I'm most closely allied to, that's libraries and museums. And for those institutions to remain relevant and engaged in their communities, they are going to have to face the reallocation of existing resources, because they can't always, I mean, it's great to have a starter kit for something like this and get going, but if this really is important to your community, engaging learners, then, and this is the 21st century challenge, what do we let go that we used to do, where some people expect us to do, and our newer audiences don't? So I really think you have to look at your institute, and you're in a unique situation as you're having your own nonprofit, but an institution with an existing budget has to look at how they're really using their resources. The question on community engagement, I think that John's Vistas, I mean, they're trained at community engagement, but one of the reasons why I think libraries and museums, and to some extent schools as well, are great places for this work is that we really know our communities. And we already have the connections on the ground. That's the platform that you need to have an activity like this be successful. So I think that really being embedded in your communities and also looking at what your institution is doing and making sure that it's meeting the needs of the community will support success of makerspaces and STEM education in general.
That's great.
So to tackle a couple of these at once and kind of get to that, how do you really develop community engagement on the ground and make sure that it's what the community wants and needs? And also to touch on the sustainability piece a little bit. I've said this before, is that's really what our program design is for the AmeriCorps Vista program. It's a little bit different than our national service, our other national service programs, in the sense that it is capacity building. It's designed to be a 3-year program, and so from the very beginning of the work, it's how in 3 years is this effort going to stand up on its own? You know, how is the training, how is the fundraising going to happen, who's going to support it? And so from the very beginning, that is kind of built in as much as can be, at least the question is. From the community engagement strategy, and Kumar touched on this before, it's really how to engage our state infrastructure. And what we did last year after the president announced the STEM AmeriCorps initiative is we actually just put guidance into our we put out annual state guidance to our state offices that we encourage them to partner and look for people in the community that were well-placed and interested in leading on this work, and to develop local programs with them. And so our feedback loop on that is a little delayed, and we don't always get real-time information about what these folks out, our staff around the country, are doing. But right before this year's White House Science Fair, we got one of our first report backs where our Southeast region got together and they decided that they were going to invest all of their summertime vistas, which are usually do about 6 to 8 weeks of work, doing STEM education projects, and many of them encouraging making activity. And they had looked for a wide variety of local institutions to partner with on that. And so, you know, there were HBCUs, there was local 4-H chapters and Girl Scouts, and a lot of them in very rural locations, and looking for partners in some resource poor locations can be a challenge. But I think it's again, it's kind of boots on the ground. It's people who are out there looking for the work and listening to set things up. And we train people as much as we can, and we try to bring people around metrics at a very high level in what the outcomes we want to measure, instead of having very outputs at a very granular level. And so we hope to roll up metrics that are much more focused on, have we changed interest and behavior? You know, how are kids spending their time differently after they have been involved in making activities? Those are some of the things that we're looking at right now, but we're very early on, and we're definitely seeking guidance from other experts in that area.
Well, these are interesting questions, aren't they? So, I started at NSF about the week that we got involved in the internet. And one of my first jobs at NSF was to write a justification for NSF being involved in the development of the internet. And what NSF does is it funds the underlying technologies that enable these things.
How much did you get right? I think everyone's curious.
Well, it happened. I think, OMB decided to allow us to fund the beginning of the internet. What happened in the beginning of the internet was that certain people benefit. In this case, it was scientists who wanted to exchange data and enable their research. And of course, we felt that enabling better research was a good thing. So we funded that along with DARPA, by the way. So it was originally NSF DARPANet, if anyone is old enough to remember that. And then I think what happened after that is we've also funded a lot of protocols and computer science development and that sort of thing, all of which enabled things to happen. And then the community started to pick this up and find ways where it could benefit them. And in many cases, the benefit was monetary. So people started making money at it. And when people start making money at it, then you get people like Bill Gates, and they start to fund other activities. And I think sustainability comes out of both interest and profit making using the thing as well. And so as this expands, I would guess that sustainability will come out of pretty much the same things that led to sustainability in the internet. Metrics, right, okay, and cynicism, whatever. So, for the past 20 years, we've partnered with the Department of Energy in funding a competition among academic institutions dealing with automobiles. It's been called many different things, and I don't even know what it's called now, Challenge X and so on. But the major auto companies, and especially Ford and GM, have donated vehicles to, it's been 16, 17, 18 different institutions, year by year, every other year I think they donate vehicles. And the challenge was to enhance these vehicles in different ways, to increase fuel mileage, for example, while maintaining other drivability and safety and things like that. And it's interesting because I participated in this for several years. And what I saw was that the students that got involved in actually the hands-on part of this and redesigning the vehicles, making the parts, putting them together, testing it, all of that. They got so interested in what they were doing that they were almost flunking their courses in engineering. They went from A's and B's to C's and D's. And yet when they graduated, the companies looked to these people because they're the ones they wanted to hire. Why? They had hands-on experience. And this comes back to metrics, I think, because the metric we commonly use in academia is GPA, right? Yeah. Average of your test scores, basically. But do tests really measure what it is that are we really interested in that as the score? And I'm sure many of you here would argue with standardized testing and stuff, is that really what measures how well we're doing in terms of education? So I think that partly what we do at NSF is we fund research on metrics. And I'm not here to say, well, here's the metric right now, and I really don't know. In fact, I've studied aspects of metrics a lot myself, and I'm not even sure there exists an appropriate metric, even though we haven't found it yet. And the other thing that I would say is every time we seem to get to a point of measuring stuff, the measure itself starts to drive what we're doing, and not often in ways that we really want to drive it. So we have to be careful about what we measure. What else to say?
That's great. Why don't we do another round? And I want Dale to participate in this one.
George's comment is terrific. I mean, I think, almost from the federal government point of view, though, they're the ones holding up these measurements. So, people feel they have to be accountable to measurements that often don't make a lot of sense. I want to come back to the community question. So I think that, and one of the key things, whether it's the VISTA programs, is really mobilizing the community. There are a lot of people that want to get involved, and I like the gentleman's question about, take it back to his library, museum, how do they connect in? And it's not always clear how to do that, or there's many layers involved, to get kind of activated. And so I think that, it really is this sort of bottom-up force of people organizing and doing things, and then to some degree government is more of a top-down, and it's kind of the middleware that's missing there a little bit. It's like how do we tie some of those things so they don't get imposed on as solutions from above? How do you empower people from underneath to go out and do things? That's kind of the question on my mind.
Other thoughts?
Does anyone have any responses to that on the panel? Because we have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to make sure.
Why would you close out, and why don't we start with that, and then when we go backwards? So George, do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, I would comment about what you were just saying. I think anytime you measure things, we quantify them. And in essence, it's saying we don't care about quality, because quality is not an objective thing, it's a subjective thing. And I really lament this whole process of objective measures, because to me, quality is a much more important thing than quantity. And I really don't know how we go about measuring it any way other than to say, you look at the best people in the field and say, tell me what's good, and trust them with it. And I think if you get good people trying to do good things, that then some of the things they do are good. Some of the things fail. Things fail, but even if we were 10% successful, it'd be a huge win in that category.
So to go back to the community engagement piece, and I couldn't agree more that it really has to be a bottom-up piece. Our programs are designed to fund the organizations that are in communities, embedded in communities, as opposed to us creating and generating and overseeing volunteers ourselves. With the exception of one program, we have an AmeriCorps NCCC program. It's 18 to 24-year-olds that we run ourselves. And that program actually is a nice resource and actually have been utilized by a lot of maker fairs around the country. They do service spikes, usually 6 to 8 weeks, and they come in like a crack team and can help set up an event or do a big blast service project. But really, with the exception of that program, we do look to kind of get down to the ground. The problem does come back to the same question about metrics, though, because we are responsible, to Congress and what we're funding, and so we often have requirements and that we're able to show that what the national service members are doing are impactful. So it creates I think a challenge for the field, especially as we think about the maker movement and the more and more that we can find partnerships with philanthropy who are able to support that, or intermediaries who are able to provide capacity building and then let small communities, both in disadvantaged economically and rural locations, be able to access resources that oftentimes aren't available to them. We do some funding. I've mentioned the NCCC program, I mentioned the VISTA program. The one other I'll mention is our volunteer generation program, and it's just a straight up small grant program for volunteer centers. We are working to insert a priority around STEM education in that. And we also have a senior core program, which is a volunteer generation program as well. It provides very, very small grants to nonprofits that recruit folks who are retired, and several of those are tapping into the skills of people who have done a career worth of work in science, technology, and engineering, and putting them to use to leverage those skills in communities. And so we have a variety of resources, but I think the question is really a valid one.
That's great. Susan.
Just real quickly here, I appreciate the comments of all the panelists and the really great questions. I think, we are just beginning to try to identify best practices in making in museums and libraries, and although I don't have a website to give you yet, anybody come to imls.gov and we'll get you information, or I'll give you my card. But what we've heard from some of the early adopters is that no matter what your community is, particularly if you're going to embed this in what can be viewed as somewhat traditional organizations, libraries and museums, you really need to identify the folks in your community, the hackers, the folks that maybe do their own little tech shop stuff, folks that are really engaged in this work, and have them, or hopefully they've come to you, or you've created some kind of either a community advisory committee, or you have folks who are invested in making this successful. And again, that really goes to knowing what's happening in your community. Now, the federal government or your state government could create models and best practices that would give you a jump start, but if you don't have community buy-in for this, it can be really challenging. And we've just found in the experiences of the libraries and museums where this is successful, that they really have engaged with members of their community. And some of them are not necessarily the most frequent visitors of libraries and museums, but they're reaching out, finding new communities that they want to engage in, and making their services more relevant and more successful. I also we didn't touch too much on the question that you posed about informal education, but I frankly think that over the next 5 to 10 years, particularly K-12 education is going to be hugely disrupted, and this is just the beginning of that kind of disruption. And I think that those of us who are engaged and dedicated to creativity are going to have many opportunities to engage and be relevant to our communities in terms of supporting creativity.
That's great. Well, I want to thank our esteemed panel for all their thoughts and all of the great questions that we got. I think some of them are going to stick around right after to be able to answer any questions. And I want to thank all of you. There's so many sort of doers and makers in this room who are working actively in this space. One of the things that we're trying to do, and as you can sort of tell from this panel, the federal agencies are becoming increasingly more knowledgeable in this space and are trying to set up both programs and a set of engagements that deepen that. But all that started with folks saying, hey, have you thought about X and Y working together? So feel free to both pitch them and us on what these multi-sector partnerships can look like, because I think we're still in the early innings of this and want to do a ton more. So thank you again to everybody, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you so much. I want to thank our Leveraging Federal Support for Making panel. So if you give them a round of applause.